I never imagined that the walls of my own home could hold secrets so heavy they would shatter everything I believed about my family. That night, when I found the safe hidden behind my sister-in-law's closet, the ground beneath me crumbled, and I felt completely alone. The weight of that discovery would change everything forever. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Eleanor, and at 72 years old, I thought I knew what love looked like. I thought I understood what family meant. I was wrong about so many things, and it took finding that cold metal box to finally open my eyes to the truth that had been staring at me for decades. Every morning in my cramped Queens apartment used to start the same way. The sound of the subway rumbling beneath my feet, shaking the thin walls of my one-bedroom rental. The smell of burnt coffee from the deli downstairs would seep through the cracks in my windows, mixing with the scent of exhaust fumes and the distant aroma of street vendor hot dogs. My kitchen table, barely big enough for two, was always cluttered with unpaid bills, prescription bottles, and my old flip phone that rarely rang anymore. I would sit there in my faded house dress, the same one I'd worn for 3 years because buying new clothes felt like an impossible luxury. My arthritis-swollen fingers would wrap around a chipped ceramic mug, and I'd stare out at the fire escape, watching pigeons fight over breadcrumbs someone had scattered on the metal grating. The cold silence of my apartment felt heavier than the humid summer air that New York is famous for. But it hadn't always been this way. I remember when my phone used to buzz with messages, when my small living room would echo with laughter instead of the constant hum of my ancient refrigerator. There was a time when my family needed me, wanted me, when I felt like I mattered in their busy, successful lives. My husband Richard and I had been married for 47 years. 47 years of building a life together, of raising our daughter Sarah in a small house in Queens before we lost it to medical bills and Richard's failed business ventures. When we moved into the apartment, Richard's sister Monica offered to let us stay in her guest room in her beautiful Tribeca loft. "Family helps family," she said with that warm smile that I now realize was as fake as the designer handbags she claimed were gifts from friends. Monica's apartment was everything mine wasn't. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Hudson River, gleaming hardwood floors that probably cost more than I made in 2 years, and a kitchen island bigger than my entire living space. The walls were decorated with expensive art, the kind that made me afraid to breathe too hard in case I somehow damaged something worth more than my yearly Social Security check. For months, I lived there like a ghost. I tried to make myself small, invisible, grateful. I cleaned their bathrooms until the porcelain sparkled, I cooked their meals with ingredients I couldn't afford to buy for myself, and I watched their children while they went to expensive dinners in Manhattan. I told myself it was temporary, that we were saving money, that family was supposed to help each other through difficult times. But the weeks turned into months, and the months turned into a year. Richard seemed comfortable, more comfortable than he'd been in our own home. He'd sit in Monica's leather armchair, reading her Wall Street Journal, drinking coffee from her expensive espresso machine. When I'd try to talk to him about finding our own place again, he'd wave me off. "Why rush? Monica loves having us here. Besides, where else would we go?" The truth was, I felt like an intruder in my own life. Every morning, Monica would glide through the apartment in her silk robes and designer slippers, making phone calls about her real estate investments, her stock portfolio, her weekend trips to the Hamptons. She never worked a traditional job, but money seemed to flow around her like water. She'd mention casually over breakfast that she'd made thousands in Bitcoin that week, or that her financial advisor had recommended diversifying her assets into gold. I, meanwhile, was surviving on a fixed income that barely covered my medications. The prescription bottles lined up on Monica's granite countertop like little soldiers, reminding me daily of my failures, my limitations, my dependence on others. Blood pressure medication, arthritis pills, the antidepressants my doctor had prescribed when the weight of everything became too much to bear alone. My daughter Sarah lived in Brooklyn with her 2 young children. She worked as a nurse at Mount Sinai, pulling double shifts to make ends meet after her divorce. Sarah was the light of my life, the one person who still called me regularly, who still seemed to care about my opinions, my feelings, my existence. But even those calls had become strained lately, filled with her own stress about childcare costs, rent increases, the exhausting reality of being a single mother in one of the most expensive cities in the world. "Mom, I'm trying," she'd whisper into the phone during her breaks at the hospital. "But the kids need new winter coats, and Emma needs tutoring, and I just don't know how I'm going to manage Christmas this year." The defeat in her voice broke my heart into smaller pieces each time we spoke. I wanted so desperately to help her, to be the mother she deserved, the grandmother my grandchildren needed. But what could I offer? My Social Security barely covered my own basic needs, and I was living in someone else's home, sleeping in someone else's guest room, eating food someone else had paid for. That's when the messages started. Or rather, when they stopped. It began with small things. Sarah's texts would take longer to be answered. Family group chats that I wasn't included in. Holiday plans discussed in hushed tones that went quiet when I entered the room. I'd catch fragments of conversations between Richard and Monica, mentions of investments and opportunities, and keeping things simple. One October evening, as the leaves in Central Park were turning those beautiful shades of gold and crimson that make New York feel magical, I received a text that changed everything. It was from my granddaughter Emma, Sarah's 8-year-old who had always been my little buddy, my partner in puzzle solving and cookie baking. "Grandma, are you coming to my birthday party next week?" Mommy said maybe not. My hand shook as I read those words. Emma's birthday party. My own granddaughter's birthday party, and I was of maybe not. I immediately called Sarah, my heart pounding as the phone rang once, twice, 3 times before going to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Sarah. I can't take your call right now, but leave a message and I'll get back to you as soon as possible." I left 3 messages that night. Sarah didn't call back. The next morning, I asked Richard about the party. He was sitting in Monica's kitchen, scrolling through his iPad, probably reading about stock market trends or cryptocurrency prices, subjects that had become his obsession since we'd moved in with his sister. "What party?" he asked without looking up. "Emma's birthday party. Our granddaughter's birthday party, Richard." He glanced at me briefly, then returned to his screen. "Oh, that. I think it's going to be small this year. You know how things are." But I didn't know how things were. That was the problem. Everything felt like a secret I wasn't invited to understand. That afternoon, while Richard was out getting his hair cut and Monica was at her yoga class, I decided to do something I'd never done before in my life. I went through Monica's mail that had been left on the kitchen counter. I told myself I was just organizing it, helping out, being useful. But the truth was, I was desperate for answers, for some explanation of why I felt so invisible in my own family. What I found among the usual bills and advertisements was a bank statement. Monica's bank statement, carelessly left in an opened envelope next to a stack of real estate magazines. The numbers on that statement made my hands tremble. Monica had more money in her checking account than I'd made in the last 5 years combined. There were regular deposits, large ones, from sources I didn't recognize. Investment returns, dividend payments, something called cryptocurrency gains, that showed thousands of dollars appearing like magic every few weeks. But it wasn't just the money that shocked me. It was the spending. Expensive restaurant charges, luxury shopping sprees, a payment to something called Elite Travel Services, for an amount that would have covered my rent for 6 months. All of this while I ate generic cereal for breakfast and wore the same 3 outfits in rotation because I couldn't afford to replace my worn-out clothes. I put the statement back exactly where I found it, but the numbers burned in my memory like a brand. Monica wasn't just comfortable, she was wealthy. Wealthy enough to help Sarah with the children's expenses, wealthy enough to help me find a small apartment of my own, wealthy enough to make our lives so much easier. But she never offered, and we never knew to ask because we never knew how much she actually had. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the guest room bed, listening to the sounds of the city filtering through Monica's expensive windows, and I tried to make sense of what I discovered. Richard snored softly beside me, content and unaware of the storm brewing in my chest. How could he not see what I was seeing? How could he be so comfortable living on his sister's charity while our own daughter struggled to buy winter coats for our grandchildren? The weeks that followed felt like walking through fog. Halloween came and went without an invitation to take Emma and her brother trick-or-treating, something that had been our tradition since they were old enough to walk. Thanksgiving plans were discussed in whispers, and when I asked directly about the dinner arrangements, Monica smiled that same bright, empty smile and said, "Oh, we're keeping it simple this year. Just immediate family." I was immediate family. I was Richard's wife, Sarah's mother, the children's grandmother. But somehow, I wasn't immediate enough. The breaking point came on a cold Tuesday evening in November. I was looking for a scarf in Monica's hall closet, something warm to wrap around my shoulders for a walk to the pharmacy. The closet was perfectly organized, like everything else in Monica's life. Designer coats hung in neat rows, expensive boots lined the floor, and shelves held purses and accessories that probably cost more than most people's monthly salaries. As I reached for a simple black scarf on the top shelf, my hand knocked against something unexpected. Something hard and cold and completely out of place among the soft fabrics and leather goods. I stood on my tiptoes, pushing aside a cashmere coat, and there it was. A safe. A small, black metal safe, hidden behind the hanging clothes like a secret too dangerous to keep in plain sight. My heart hammered in my chest as I stared at that cold, locked box. Why would Monica keep a safe hidden in her closet? What could be so valuable, so secret, that it needed to be locked away from even her own family? I reached out and touched it, my fingertips tracing the smooth metal surface. It was heavier than I expected, solidly built, the kind of safe that meant business. There was a digital keypad on the front, numbers that glowed softly in the dim closet light. I backed away quickly, my hands shaking as I grabbed the first scarf I could find and closed the closet door. But the image of that safe burned in my mind like a photograph I couldn't unsee. What was Monica hiding? And more importantly, why did I feel so certain that whatever was in that safe had something to do with the growing distance in our family, the whispered conversations, the feeling that I was slowly being erased from their lives? The next few days passed in a blur of suspicion and doubt. I found myself watching Monica more carefully, listening to her phone conversations, paying attention to the way she interacted with Richard. There were small things I'd never noticed before. The way she'd change the subject when I entered a room. The way she'd quickly close her laptop when I came into the kitchen. The way she and Richard would exchange glances when they thought I wasn't looking. I started remembering other things too. Times over the past year when Monica had mentioned business deals, investment opportunities, money matters that Richard seemed to understand but never shared with me. Times when Sarah had called, upset about money, and Richard would take the phone into another room, speaking in low tones that I couldn't hear. One afternoon, while Monica was out and Richard was napping, I made a decision that would have terrified the old Eleanor. I went back to that closet. The safe was exactly where I'd found it, hidden behind designer coats like a dark secret. I stared at the digital keypad, my mind racing. What would Monica use as a combination? Her birthday? Richard's birthday? Some important date I didn't know about? I tried her birthday first. The keypad beeped softly, but the red light stayed red. Wrong combination. I tried Richard's birthday, then various combinations of numbers I could think of. Nothing worked, and with each failed attempt, my anxiety grew. What if Monica came home? What if the safe had some kind of alarm? What if I was crossing a line I could never uncross? But I couldn't stop. Something deep in my gut told me that whatever was in that safe held answers to questions I'd been afraid to ask. Why had our family dynamics changed so dramatically? Why did I feel like an outsider in my own life? Why did Monica have so much money while the rest of us struggled? I was about to give up when I remembered something. A few weeks earlier, I'd seen Monica writing something down on a small piece of paper, muttering numbers under her breath. At the time, I'd assumed it was a phone number or an address, but now I wondered if it might have been something else entirely. I tried to remember the sequence of numbers I'd heard her repeat. Was it 0847? Or 4780? My arthritic fingers fumbled over the keypad as I tried different combinations, my heart pounding so loud I was sure the neighbors could hear it. And then, miracle of miracles, I heard a soft click. The red light turned green. The safe was open. Inside, my world collapsed. Stacks of cash filled the small space, more money than I'd ever seen outside of a bank. 20s, 50s, hundreds, bundled together with rubber bands like in the movies. But it wasn't just cash. There were documents too. Bank statements, investment records, what looked like property deeds. And in the very back, a manila envelope with my daughter's name written on it in Monica's neat handwriting. With trembling hands, I pulled out the envelope marked Sarah. Inside were copies of documents I'd never seen before. A trust fund. A trust fund in Sarah's name, set up years ago, worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Money that could have solved every financial worry my daughter had ever expressed to me, money that could have paid for the children's education, healthcare, all the things that kept Sarah awake at night with worry. But there was more. A letter, signed by Monica and dated 6 months earlier. A letter explaining that the trust fund had been activated, that regular payments were supposed to be going to Sarah to help with living expenses and childcare costs. Payments that, according to the bank records, had never been made. The papers slipped from my hands like leaves in autumn wind. Monica had been stealing from my daughter. Not just hiding money from us, but actually stealing funds that were legally Sarah's, money that was supposed to help her and the children. All those nights I'd listened to Sarah cry about rent money, about the kids needing new shoes, about choosing between groceries and electricity bills. Monica could have solved everything with the stroke of a pen. I sat on the closet floor, surrounded by evidence of a betrayal so deep I could barely process it. How long had this been going on? How many times had Sarah called me, desperate and crying, while Monica sat in her designer kitchen, literally sitting on hundreds of thousands of dollars that belonged to my daughter? The worst part was Richard. The documents showed that Richard knew. His signature was on several of the papers, his name listed as a co-trustee along with Monica. My husband of 47 years, the man who'd held me when I cried about feeling useless and broke, knew that there was money available to help our struggling daughter and had chosen to say nothing. They'd all chosen to say nothing while I lay awake nights worrying about Sarah, while I rationed my own medications to save money that I could send to help with the grandchildren, while I wore threadbare clothes and ate generic food to stretch my tiny budget just a little further. I don't remember how long I sat there on that closet floor. Time seemed suspended, like I was living in a bubble where normal rules didn't apply. When I finally stood up, my legs were shaky, my vision blurred from crying tears I hadn't realized I was shedding. Carefully, I photographed everything with my old phone. The documents, the bank statements, the cash bundles, though I left everything exactly as I'd found it. The safe closed with the same soft click, and I hung the coats back in front of it, arranging them exactly as they'd been before. But I couldn't arrange my heart the same way. The knowledge I now carried felt like carrying stones in my chest, heavy and sharp and impossible to ignore. That evening, Monica returned from her day of shopping and yoga and whatever else rich people do while their families struggle. She greeted me with that same bright smile, asked about my day, offered to make me some tea. All normal, all pleasant, all a complete lie. "How was your afternoon, Eleanor?" she asked, settling into her expensive sofa with a cup of herbal tea that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. "Quiet," I managed to say, my voice sounding strange even to my own ears. "Just a quiet afternoon." Richard joined us, fresh from his shower, looking more relaxed and content than I'd seen him in years. Why wouldn't he be relaxed? He was living rent-free in luxury while his daughter counted pennies and his wife felt like a charity case. "I was thinking," Monica continued, stirring honey into her tea with a silver spoon, "maybe we should plan something special for the holidays this year. Richard mentioned that Sarah's been stressed lately. Maybe we could do something nice for her and the kids." The casualness of it, the absolute audacity, nearly took my breath away. Here she was, suggesting we do something nice for Sarah while sitting on a fortune that already belonged to her. It was like watching someone steal someone's wallet and then offer to buy them lunch. "That's a lovely idea," I said carefully. "What did you have in mind?" Monica shrugged, as if the welfare of my grandchildren was a minor detail she hadn't quite worked out yet. "Oh, I don't know. Maybe dinner somewhere nice. Or we could contribute to their Christmas fund." Contribute to their Christmas fund. With their own money. Money that Monica had been stealing from them for months. I excused myself early that night, claiming a headache that wasn't entirely false. In the privacy of the guest room, I stared at the photos on my phone, at the evidence of betrayal that seemed to grow more overwhelming each time I looked at it. What was I supposed to do with this information? How do you confront the people you love with proof that they've been lying to you for months, maybe years? And what about Sarah? How could I tell my daughter that there had been money available all along, money that could have prevented so many sleepless nights, so many tears, so many times she'd had to tell the children, "Not this time," when they asked for simple things? I spent that night staring at the ceiling, listening to Richard's peaceful breathing beside me. How could he sleep so soundly when he knew what he knew? How could he watch our daughter struggle, watch me sacrifice, and never once suggest that there might be another way? The next morning, I made a decision. I called Sarah from the pharmacy, where I'd gone to pick up my prescriptions, using the privacy of the walk to work up my courage. "Mom? Is everything okay?" Sarah's voice was tired, like it always was these days. "Sarah, sweetheart, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Of course. What is it?" "Have you ever heard Monica or your father mention anything about a trust fund? Or any kind of investment account set up in your name?" There was a long pause. Too long. "Mom, what are you talking about?" But I could hear something in her voice. Not confusion, but caution. The tone people use when they're trying not to lie but also trying not to tell the truth. "Sarah, please. Just answer me honestly. Has anyone ever mentioned money being set aside for you and the children?" Another pause, then a sigh that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. "Mom, I don't want to get into family politics. Some things are complicated, okay?" "What things?" "What's complicated about helping your own daughter when she's struggling?" "Mom, please don't make this harder than it already is." And then she hung up. My own daughter hung up on me rather than explain what she meant by family politics and complicated. I stood outside the pharmacy, cold November wind cutting through my thin coat, and realized that the betrayal was even deeper than I'd imagined. It wasn't just Monica and Richard who knew about the money. Sarah knew too. Sarah knew there was help available and had chosen not to take it, or couldn't take it, or had been prevented from taking it for reasons I didn't understand. The walk back to Monica's apartment felt like walking through a dream, or maybe a nightmare. Everything looked the same, the familiar streets of Tribeca, the expensive restaurants and boutique shops, the well-dressed people hurrying past with their important lives and their complicated problems. But I felt like I was seeing it all for the first time, like I'd been asleep and was just now waking up to reality. When I got back to the apartment, Monica and Richard were sitting at the kitchen island, looking at something on Richard's iPad. They looked up when I entered, and for just a moment, I saw something pass between them. A look of concern, or maybe guilt, or maybe just annoyance at being interrupted. "Everything okay?" Monica asked, though her tone suggested she didn't particularly care about the answer. "Fine," I said, though nothing was fine and might never be fine again. That evening, I tried again with Richard. We were alone in the guest room, getting ready for bed, and I thought maybe in the privacy of our shared space, he might be honest with me. "Richard, I need to talk to you about Sarah." He was brushing his teeth, and he paused to look at me in the mirror. "What about Sarah?" She's struggling. Really struggling. The kids need so many things, and she's working herself to death trying to provide for them. Richard rinsed his mouth and turned to face me. Eleanor, we've been through this. We're doing what we can. We can't solve everyone's problems. But what if we could? What if there was a way to help her that we're not seeing? Something flickered across his face then. Fear, maybe. Or warning. What are you getting at, Eleanor? I'm getting at the fact that our daughter is suffering, and our grandchildren are doing without, and we're living here in luxury like it doesn't matter. We're not living in luxury. We're guests here, remember? Monica is being generous, but that doesn't mean we can take advantage. Take advantage of what, exactly? But Richard was already turning away, already closing down the conversation like he closed down every conversation that might lead somewhere he didn't want to go. I'm tired, Eleanor. Can we not do this tonight? And that's when I knew for certain that my husband was part of whatever was happening. Part of the lies, part of the secret, part of the reason my daughter was struggling while money that belonged to her sat locked in a hidden safe. The next few days passed in a fog of pretending. Pretending I didn't know what I knew, pretending everything was normal, pretending that my heart wasn't breaking a little more each time Monica made casual comments about her investments or Richard nodded along with conversations about money as if he wasn't living off someone else's charity. But I couldn't pretend forever. The weight of the secret was crushing me, and more than that, the thought of Sarah struggling while her own money sat unused was keeping me awake at night. I decided to go back to the safe. Not to steal anything, not to disturb anything, but to document everything more thoroughly. If I was going to confront this situation, I needed to understand it completely. This time, I waited until both Monica and Richard left for the day. Monica had a lunch meeting with her financial advisor, and Richard had gone to his weekly doctor's appointment. I had at least 2 hours, maybe more. The combination worked on the first try this time. My fingers remembered the sequence like they'd been practicing. The safe opened with the same soft click, revealing its treasure trove of secrets. But this time, I looked deeper. Behind the cash and the bank statements, I found more documents. More evidence of the conspiracy that had been going on around me. There were records of property investments, stocks, cryptocurrency purchases, all kinds of financial dealings that painted a picture of Monica as not just wealthy, but extremely wealthy. Her net worth was in the millions, spread across multiple accounts and investment vehicles. She owned properties I'd never heard her mention, had income streams I couldn't even understand. But more disturbing were the documents related to Sarah. The trust fund was just the beginning. There were education accounts for the children, healthcare funds, even a housing assistance program that had been set up but never activated. Money, lots of money, earmarked specifically to help my daughter and grandchildren live better lives. And all of it controlled by Monica and Richard, who had decided, for reasons I couldn't fathom, that Sarah didn't deserve access to funds that were legally hers. There were emails too, printed copies of correspondence between Monica and various financial advisors. In one exchange, dated just 3 months earlier, an advisor had asked about activating the trust payments for Sarah. Monica's response made my blood run cold. Not yet. She needs to learn to manage on her own first. Giving her access now would just make her dependent. Learn to manage on her own. While working double shifts as a nurse and raising 2 children alone. While choosing between groceries and winter clothes for the kids. While calling me in tears because she couldn't afford her son's asthma medication. Monica thought Sarah needed to learn to manage on her own, so she was withholding hundreds of thousands of dollars that could have made all the difference in my daughter's life. But the worst discovery was yet to come. At the very bottom of the safe, underneath all the other documents, I found a folder labeled Eleanor. A folder with my name on it. Inside were medical records. My medical records, obtained somehow without my knowledge or permission. Records of my arthritis diagnosis, my depression medication, even notes from my doctor about my financial stress and how it was affecting my health. There was also a document I didn't understand at first. Legal papers that looked official and important. As I read through them, my hands began to shake again. It was a power of attorney document. A document that would give Monica and Richard legal control over my finances and medical decisions if I was deemed incompetent. A document I'd never signed, never seen, never agreed to. At the bottom of the folder was a note in Monica's handwriting. Dr. Peterson says cognitive decline often begins with paranoia and unfounded accusations. Document everything. They were planning to have me declared incompetent. They were building a case to take control of my life, my decisions, my tiny bit of independence. And they were using my natural reactions to their lies and manipulation as evidence that I was losing my mind. The room spun around me. I gripped the edge of the closet door to keep from falling as the full scope of their betrayal became clear. They weren't just stealing from Sarah. They were planning to steal from me too. My autonomy, my dignity, my right to make my own choices. How long had they been planning this? How many of my questions, my concerns, my attempts to understand what was happening had been logged away as evidence of my declining mental state? How many times had I felt like I was going crazy, like I was seeing things that weren't there, when actually I was seeing things exactly as they were? I photographed everything. Every document, every bank statement, every piece of evidence of their elaborate deception. My hands were shaking so badly I had to take some pictures twice, but I managed to document it all. When I was finished, I sat back on my heels in that expensive closet, surrounded by designer clothes and hidden secrets, and I made a decision that the old Eleanor never would have made. I was going to fight back. But first, I needed to understand exactly who I was fighting. Over the next few days, I watched Monica and Richard with new eyes, paying attention to details I'd previously ignored. The way Monica would get phone calls and step out of the room to take them. The way Richard would suddenly become very interested in his iPad when I entered a room. The way they both seemed to monitor my movements, my conversations, my behavior. I realized that every time I'd expressed frustration or confusion over the past year, they'd exchanged those meaningful glances. Every time I'd questioned something that didn't make sense, they'd made mental notes. They'd been building their case against me one interaction at a time. The paranoia I'd been feeling wasn't paranoia at all. It was intuition. My subconscious had been picking up on their deception long before my conscious mind understood what was happening. The feeling of being watched, judged, managed, it was all real. Most heartbreaking of all, I began to understand Sarah's distance, her reluctance to talk about money, her strange comment about family politics. She wasn't part of the conspiracy against me. She was another victim. Monica and Richard were controlling her access to her own money, probably with conditions and restrictions that made her feel trapped. Maybe they told her she could have the money if she limited her contact with me. Maybe they convinced her that I was becoming unstable and needed to be managed. Maybe they simply convinced her that they knew best, that their way was the right way. Sarah's withdrawal from me wasn't rejection. It was coercion. This realization gave me hope, but it also made me angrier than I'd ever been in my 72 years. They'd manipulated my relationship with my own daughter, used money as a weapon to control and divide us. They'd turned my family into a web of lies and hidden agendas. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated me. On a cold December morning, while Monica was at her yoga class and Richard was meeting with his doctor about his blood pressure medication, I called a number I'd found online. A legal aid society that helped seniors with financial abuse cases. Legal Aid Society, this is Patricia. How can I help you? Hello, I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected it to be. I think my family is trying to steal from me, and I need to know what my options are. Patricia was patient and kind as I explained my situation. She asked detailed questions about the documents I'd found, about the power of attorney papers, about the trust fund that belonged to Sarah. She didn't sound shocked or skeptical. She sounded like she'd heard stories like mine before. Mrs. Johnson, she said when I finished, what you're describing is unfortunately more common than people realize. Elder financial abuse often involves family members, and it's often more complicated than outright theft. What you've discovered sounds like a systematic attempt to control both you and your daughter through financial manipulation. But what can I do about it? I'm living in their home. I have nowhere else to go. And I don't want to destroy my family. Mrs. Johnson, I need you to understand something important. You're not destroying your family. They've already done that by choosing deception and manipulation over honesty and love. What you're doing is protecting yourself and your daughter from further harm. She explained my options. I could report the unauthorized access to my medical records. I could challenge the power of attorney documents I'd never signed. I could help Sarah understand her rights to the trust fund money and other accounts. The most important thing, Patricia said, is to document everything and to start making decisions based on what's best for you, not on what will keep other people comfortable with their lies. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called Sarah and asked her to meet me for coffee. Not at Monica's apartment, not anywhere Richard or Monica might overhear, but at a little diner in Brooklyn, halfway between her apartment and mine. Sarah looked tired when she arrived, her nurse's scrubs wrinkled from a long shift, dark circles under her eyes that made her look older than her 43 years. But when she saw me, her face lit up with the same smile she'd had as a little girl. Mom, it's so good to see you. I feel like it's been forever. It has been forever, sweetheart. And that's my fault for not being more persistent about staying in touch. We ordered coffee and pie, sitting in a booth by the window where we could watch people hurrying past on the sidewalk, everyone bundled up against the December cold. Sarah, I said carefully, I need to ask you about something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. No family politics, no complications. Just honesty between mother and daughter. Sarah's smile faded, replaced by that cautious look I'd seen so many times over the phone. Mom, please don't put me in the middle of whatever's going on between you and Monica and Dad. I'm not trying to put you in the middle of anything. I'm trying to get you out of the middle of something you should never have been in to begin with. I pulled out my phone and showed her one of the photographs I'd taken. The document establishing her trust fund, with the dollar amounts clearly visible. Sarah, did you know this existed? Her reaction told me everything I needed to know. Her face went white, then red, then white again. She stared at the phone screen like it was a snake that might bite her. Mom, where did you get this? That's not important right now. What's important is that this is your money, legally and rightfully yours, and you've been struggling financially while it sits unused. Why? Sarah closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them, there were tears. Because Monica said if I took the money, she'd cut off all support for you. She said Dad was getting sicker and you were getting more dependent, and if I rocked the boat by demanding money that was technically mine, she'd have no choice but to ask you both to find somewhere else to live. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Monica had been using me as leverage against Sarah, and using Sarah as justification for controlling me. She'd created a triangle of manipulation where each of us was afraid to speak up because we thought it would hurt the other. Sarah, your father isn't getting sicker. And I'm not becoming more dependent. Monica has been lying to all of us. I showed her more of the photographs. The evidence of Monica's wealth, the records of investments and properties, the proof that she could easily support all of us without any strain on her finances whatsoever. She's been keeping us apart and keeping us scared so we wouldn't compare notes, I continued. She's been making you think you had to choose between your financial security and my housing, when the truth is she could provide both without even noticing the expense. Sarah stared at the documents, her hands shaking as she scrolled through image after image of evidence. Mom, there's more, she whispered. Things I haven't told you because I was afraid they'd kick you out. What things? Monica has been making me give her detailed reports about your behavior. She said you were showing signs of dementia and they needed to document it for your own protection. She made me feel like I was helping you by telling her when you seemed confused or upset. The power of attorney papers. The medical records. The notes about cognitive decline. It was all connected, a web of lies designed to trap both me and Sarah in Monica's version of our lives. What kind of reports? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Every time you called me upset about feeling left out of family events. Every time you mentioned feeling like they were keeping secrets. Every time you questioned why things felt different. Monica said these were signs of paranoia and that family history of memory problems. Family history of memory problems. My mother had indeed suffered from dementia in her final years, but that had been the result of multiple strokes, not some genetic inevitability. Sarah, I need you to understand something. Everything I've been feeling, all the confusion and suspicion and sense that something wasn't right, it was all justified. I wasn't becoming paranoid or delusional. I was reacting normally to being lied to and manipulated. We sat in that diner for 3 hours, comparing notes, sharing stories, putting together a timeline of deception that stretched back months, maybe years. Every phone call that had gone unanswered, every family event I'd been excluded from, every time I'd felt like I was losing my mind, it all had explanations. Rational, horrible explanations. By the time we left the diner, we had a plan. Sarah would contact the bank about accessing her trust fund. I would move out of Monica's apartment and find my own place, even if it was small and humble. We would stop allowing Monica and Richard to control our relationship with each other. But first, I had to confront them. Not with accusations or anger, but with evidence and consequences. I waited until the next evening, when we were all together in Monica's living room. Monica was reading a real estate magazine, probably planning her next property investment. Richard was watching the news, or pretending to, while actually scrolling through stock prices on his phone. I need to talk to both of you about something important, I said, setting my own phone on the coffee table. Monica looked up from her magazine with mild interest. Of course, Eleanor. What's on your mind? I found the safe in your closet. The change in the room was immediate and electric. Monica's magazine slipped from her hands. Richard's phone clattered to the floor. For a moment, nobody spoke. I'm sorry, Monica said, but her voice had lost its casual warmth. The safe behind your coats. The one with Sarah's trust fund documents. The ones with my medical records and the power of attorney papers I never signed. Richard leaned forward in his chair, his face flushed. Eleanor, you had no right, to what? To discover that you've been lying to me for months? To find out that you've been keeping my daughter from money that belongs to her while she works herself to death trying to provide for your grandchildren? Monica stood up slowly, her composure sliding back into place like a mask. Eleanor, I think you're confused about what you found. These are complicated financial matters, and I don't think you understand. I understand perfectly. I picked up my phone and showed them the screen. Photographs of bank statements, trust documents, investment records. I understand that Sarah has hundreds of thousands of dollars sitting in accounts she can't access because you've convinced her that helping herself would hurt me. That money comes with responsibilities, Monica began. It comes with your need to control people. Sarah is a grown woman with children to support. That money is legally hers. You have no right to withhold it for any reason. Richard tried a different approach. Eleanor, you're getting upset over nothing. We're family. We help each other when we can, but there are limits. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Monica spends more on a weekend trip than Sarah makes in 3 months, but there are limits to helping our daughter. I showed them more photographs. The evidence of Monica's wealth, the property investments, the cryptocurrency gains. You could solve every financial problem Sarah has ever had without even noticing the expense. But instead, you've been playing games, making her choose between her security and mine, making me feel like a burden while you plan to have me declared incompetent. The silence that followed was thick with tension. Monica and Richard looked at each other, having one of those wordless conversations married couples master over decades. Finally, Monica spoke. Eleanor, I think you're having some kind of episode. Breaking into safes, making wild accusations about perfectly normal financial arrangements, wild accusations. I interrupted. I have photographs of documents with your signature authorizing the withholding of Sarah's trust payments. I have copies of my medical records that you obtained illegally. I have power of attorney papers with forged signatures. Monica's composure cracked slightly. Those aren't forged. Richard and I are simply preparing for the possibility that you might need help managing your affairs someday. It's a normal precaution for someone your age. Someone my age who's showing signs of paranoia and cognitive decline? According to notes you've been keeping about my behavior. This time the silence stretched longer. Richard looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. Monica's face had gone very pale. Sarah told me, I continued. About the reports you made her give you. About how you convinced her that helping me meant watching me and documenting my mental state. We were trying to help, you were trying to control. You've been using me as leverage against Sarah and using Sarah as justification for controlling me. You've been keeping us apart and keeping us scared so we wouldn't compare notes and discover what you were doing. I stood up, my legs steadier than they'd been in months. I'm leaving. Tomorrow morning, I'm moving out of this apartment. Sarah is accessing her trust fund and taking control of her own financial life. And if you ever again try to manipulate either of us, I will take every piece of evidence I've gathered to the police, to social services, to anyone who will listen. Monica found her voice then, and it was cold as January wind. You can't prove any of this. Those documents are private financial matters, and taking photographs of them was probably illegal. Maybe. But forging power of attorney documents is definitely illegal. Obtaining medical records without authorization is definitely illegal. Financial elder abuse is definitely illegal. Would you like to compare crimes? Richard finally spoke up, his voice tired and defeated. Eleanor, please. We can work this out. We're family. Family doesn't lie to each other for months. Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't try to have each other declared incompetent for the crime of asking questions. I picked up my phone and headed toward the guest room. One more thing, I said from the doorway. I've spoken to a lawyer. Sarah and I both have. So if anything happens to me, if I have any kind of accident, or if anyone tries to have me committed or declared incompetent, there are people who will know exactly where to look and what questions to ask. That night, I packed everything I owned into 2 suitcases and a cardboard box. It didn't take long. After decades of marriage, of building a life, of accumulating the objects and memories that make a house a home, everything important to me fit into a space small enough to carry. But maybe that was its own kind of freedom. The next morning, I called a cab and left Monica's apartment for the last time. Richard tried to stop me at the door, tried to convince me to stay and work things out, but I'd heard enough of his words to last a lifetime. Sarah met me at a small apartment in Queens, not far from where we'd lived when she was growing up. It was tiny, just a studio with a kitchenette and a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in. But it was mine. The lease was in my name, the key was in my hand, and nobody could use it to control me or anyone I loved. Are you sure about this, Mom? Sarah asked, looking around at the bare walls and the single window that faced an alley rather than the river. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. That afternoon, Sarah called the bank about her trust fund. It took several hours of phone calls, document reviews, and legal consultations, but by evening, she had access to accounts she'd never known she could touch. Mom, she said, calling me from her apartment, her voice thick with emotion, do you know how long it's been since I went to bed without worrying about money? How long? I can't remember. I literally cannot remember the last time I felt financially secure. Within a week, Sarah had paid off her credit card debt, caught up on her student loans, and put deposits down on a larger apartment in a safer neighborhood. She bought winter coats for the children, scheduled dental checkups she'd been postponing, even took a weekend off work for the first time in 2 years. The transformation wasn't just financial. The constant stress that had been weighing her down for years lifted like fog in sunlight. She laughed more, smiled more, had energy for things beyond survival. But the most important change was in our relationship. Without Monica's manipulation keeping us apart, we began talking every day. Not about money or problems or family politics, but about life. About books and movies and Sarah's dreams for the future. About the children's school projects and my newfound interest in watercolor painting. We were mother and daughter again, not casualties in someone else's power game. Richard called several times in those first weeks, trying to convince me to come back, trying to minimize what had happened. Monica feels terrible about the misunderstanding, he said in one message. She wants to make things right. But there was no misunderstanding. There was only choice. Monica and Richard had chosen deception over honesty, control over love, manipulation over trust. They'd made those choices over and over again, for months or maybe years. I couldn't choose to forget that. But I could choose what to do with the knowledge. I chose peace. My little studio apartment became a sanctuary. I painted the walls pale yellow, the color of morning sunlight. I bought plants for the windowsill, a comfortable chair for reading, a small table where I ate meals I'd chosen and cooked for myself. For the first time in over a year, I felt like I was living in my own space again, making my own decisions, answering to no one but myself. The freedom was intoxicating. I could eat dinner at 9 o'clock if I wanted to, or at 5, or not at all. I could watch old movies on my tablet, or read mystery novels, or sit quietly listening to the sounds of the city. I could take long baths in my tiny bathroom without worrying about someone needing the space. I could invite Sarah and the children over without asking permission or checking schedules. My health improved too. The constant tension that had been living in my shoulders for months began to ease. I slept better, deeper, without the anxiety dreams that had been haunting my nights. My arthritis pain didn't disappear, but it became manageable again, probably because I wasn't carrying the additional weight of emotional stress. 3 months after leaving Monica's apartment, I did something I hadn't done in decades. I took a trip. It wasn't anything elaborate or expensive. Just a weekend in Philadelphia to visit an old friend I'd lost touch with years earlier. But the act of packing a small bag, buying a train ticket, and going somewhere simply because I wanted to, it felt revolutionary. My friend Martha welcomed me like no time had passed at all. We spent 2 days walking through the city, visiting museums, sharing meals, and talking about everything and nothing. Martha listened to my story without judgment, offering support without trying to fix anything or give advice I hadn't asked for. You know what I've learned? Martha said as we sat in Rittenhouse Square, watching people walk their dogs and children play on the playground. Family isn't just about blood relation. It's about people who see you, really see you, and choose to love what they see. Monica and Richard are still family, I said, though the words felt strange in my mouth. Are they? Do they see you, Eleanor? Do they choose to love what they see, or do they love the idea of you that serves their purposes? It was a question I'd been avoiding, but Martha's gentle honesty made it impossible to ignore. Monica and Richard loved having me around when I was useful, grateful, manageable. They'd never loved the parts of me that asked questions, demanded respect, refused to be controlled. That wasn't love. That was ownership. Back in New York, I began building a different kind of family. There was Sarah and the children, of course, but also new connections. Other women in my apartment building who were living alone and finding strength in independence. Volunteers at the community center where I started helping with literacy classes. People at the senior center where I played bridge on Tuesday afternoons. One of those bridge partners, a woman named Dorothy who'd been widowed 3 years earlier, became a close friend. Dorothy had also experienced financial manipulation from family members, though in her case it was adult children who tried to convince her to sell her house and move into assisted living so they could manage her assets. The hardest part, Dorothy told me over coffee one afternoon, isn't the betrayal itself. It's accepting that people you love are capable of betraying you. We both understood that particular pain. The discovery that trust you'd given freely and completely had been used as a weapon against you. The realization that your own generosity, your willingness to sacrifice for family, had made you vulnerable to their selfishness. But we also understood something else. Surviving that betrayal made us stronger, not weaker. We'd learned to set boundaries, to trust our instincts, to choose relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation. 6 months after I left Monica's apartment, Richard had a mild heart attack. Not serious, according to the doctors, but enough to require a brief hospital stay and some lifestyle changes. Monica called to tell me, her voice carefully neutral. I thought you should know. He's been asking for you. Part of me wanted to rush to the hospital, to play the role of the devoted wife who forgives everything in the face of medical crisis. That was the old Eleanor, the woman who'd spent decades prioritizing other people's comfort over her own dignity. But the new Eleanor, the one who'd learned to value herself, made a different choice. I'll send flowers, I told Monica. And my best wishes for his recovery. That's it? Eleanor, he's your husband. He's a man who participated in a plan to have me declared incompetent so he and his sister could control my finances. Being married to him doesn't erase that fact. Monica was quiet for a long moment. Then, what would it take for you to consider forgiveness? It was a fair question, and I gave it serious thought before answering. Honesty, I said finally. Complete, unvarnished honesty about everything that happened. An acknowledgement that what you both did was wrong, not just complicated or misunderstood. And concrete action to make amends, starting with a full apology to Sarah and a commitment to never interfere with her access to her own money again. That's all? Monica, those are enormous requirements. Honesty would mean admitting that you've been lying for months. Acknowledgement would mean taking responsibility instead of making excuses. Making amends would mean giving up the control you've been fighting so hard to maintain. I see. I don't think you do see, and that's the problem. You still think this is about hurt feelings or family drama. It's not. It's about fundamental respect for other people's autonomy and dignity. Richard never called to ask for the honesty I'd requested. He never acknowledged what he'd done or apologized to Sarah. Instead, I heard through mutual acquaintances that he and Monica were telling people I'd had some kind of mental breakdown, that I'd become paranoid and unstable, that they were heartbroken by my irrational behavior. It stung, but it didn't surprise me. People who build their lives on lies rarely choose truth when given the opportunity. A year after leaving Monica's apartment, I received an envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a check for $15,000 and a note in Richard's handwriting, "For your trouble. We hope this helps." I stared at that check for a long time, trying to understand what it represented. An apology? A bribe? A final attempt at control? In the end, I decided it didn't matter what Richard intended the money to represent. What mattered was what I chose to do with it. I deposited the check and used the money to take Sarah and the grandchildren on a real vacation. A week in Orlando, staying in a nice hotel, eating at restaurants, visiting theme parks and making memories that had nothing to do with financial stress or family manipulation. On our last night, as we sat by the hotel pool watching the children splash in the shallow end, Sarah said something that made everything I'd been through worthwhile. "Mom, do you know what the best part of this trip has been?" "What?" "Watching you be happy. Really, genuinely happy. I haven't seen you like this in years." She was right. The constant anxiety that had been my companion for so long was gone, replaced by something I'd almost forgotten existed: contentment. Not the manic happiness of someone trying to convince themselves that everything is fine, but the steady, quiet satisfaction of someone living authentically. I was 73 years old, living in a studio apartment in Queens, with a small social security income and no family beyond my daughter and grandchildren. By many measures, my life had shrunk significantly from what it had been when I was married and living in Monica's luxury Tribeca apartment. But I'd never felt richer. The relationships I had now were built on truth, not convenience. The choices I made were based on my own values, not on keeping other people comfortable with their lies. The peace I felt each morning when I woke up in my own small space was worth more than any amount of luxury purchased at the price of my dignity. 2 years have passed since I found that safe in Monica's closet. 2 years since I discovered that the people I'd trusted most in the world had been systematically betraying that trust. 2 years since I made the hardest and best decision of my life. Sarah is thriving. She's engaged to a kind man who adores her children and respects her strength. She's reduced her work hours at the hospital and started taking college courses in healthcare administration. The constant worry that used to shadow her eyes has been replaced by hope and confidence. The children are growing up knowing their grandmother as someone who chose courage over comfort, truth over peace, dignity over security. I hope someday that knowledge will serve them well. As for me, I'm learning that it's never too late to start over. Never too late to choose yourself. Never too late to discover that your own company is better than any relationship built on lies. I've started volunteering at a legal aid clinic, helping other seniors who are facing financial abuse from family members. It's heartbreaking how common my story is, how many elderly people are being manipulated and controlled by the very people who should be protecting them. But it's also hopeful. Every person who finds the courage to document the abuse, to seek help, to choose dignity over false security, is proof that age doesn't have to mean powerlessness. Sometimes people ask me if I regret confronting Monica and Richard, if I wish I'd found a way to handle the situation without destroying the family. My answer is always the same: I didn't destroy anything. They destroyed it when they chose deception over honesty, control over love, manipulation over respect. I simply stopped pretending the destruction hadn't happened. The family we have now, Sarah, the children, and me, along with the friends who've become chosen family, is smaller than what we had before. But it's built on solid ground instead of shifting sand. It's built on truth instead of lies. It's built on love that doesn't come with conditions or hidden agendas. That's not destruction. That's reconstruction. As I sit here in my little yellow apartment, looking out at the alley where cats sometimes sun themselves on the fire escape across the way, I think about the woman I was 2 years ago. The woman who was so afraid of being alone that she tolerated being disrespected. The woman who was so desperate to keep her family together that she ignored the fact that they'd already broken it. I feel compassion for that woman, but I don't miss her. The woman I am now knows the difference between being wanted and being used. She knows that solitude is different from loneliness, that being alone with integrity is better than being surrounded by people who see you as a problem to be managed or a resource to be exploited. The woman I am now understands that family isn't about blood relations or legal documents or shared history. It's about people who see you clearly and choose to value what they see. It's about relationships built on mutual respect rather than mutual need. The woman I am now knows that it's possible to love someone and still choose to protect yourself from them. That forgiveness doesn't require forgetting, that healing doesn't require reconciliation, that strength sometimes looks like walking away rather than standing and fighting. I've learned that money is a tool, not a measure of worth. That luxury is meaningless if it comes at the cost of your dignity. That security built on someone else's control is actually the most insecure position of all. Most importantly, I've learned that it's never too late to choose a different story for your life. Never too late to stop accepting treatment that diminishes you. Never too late to discover that your own approval is more valuable than anyone else's acceptance. The safe behind Monica's closet contained more than bank statements and legal documents. It contained the truth about who these people really were beneath their masks of family devotion. Finding it was painful, devastating, life-altering. It was also liberating. Today, when I wake up in my small space, I make my own coffee, choose my own breakfast, plan my own day according to my own priorities and desires. I answer to no one except myself and the people I've chosen to care about, people who've also chosen to care about me. Today, when my phone rings, it's usually Sarah calling to share something funny one of the children said, or Dorothy inviting me to try a new restaurant, or someone from the legal aid clinic asking if I can help translate documents for a Spanish-speaking client. It's never someone calling to tell me what I'm supposed to think, feel, or do. It's never someone using my love for them as a weapon against me. It's never someone who sees me as a problem to be solved rather than a person to be valued. That difference has made all the difference. As the sun sets over Queens, painting my yellow walls in shades of gold and amber, I raise a glass of wine to the woman I was and the woman I've become. To the courage it took to open that safe. To the strength it took to walk away from people who couldn't love me without controlling me. To the wisdom it took to build a new life on a foundation of truth instead of trying to rebuild the old one on a foundation of lies. Have you ever felt like you were losing your mind, only to discover you were actually seeing clearly for the first time? Have you ever loved someone so much that you lost yourself, and then had to choose between finding yourself and keeping them? Tell me in the comments below. Share your story, your struggle, your moment of clarity. Because somewhere out there is someone who needs to know they're not crazy, they're not ungrateful, they're not asking for too much when they ask for basic respect and honesty from the people they love. If this story resonated with you, if it felt familiar in ways that made your chest tight and your eyes water, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. It helps me continue sharing these stories, continue opening my heart, continue reminding all of us that we deserve better than settling for relationships that diminish us. And remember, it's never too late to choose yourself. It's never too late to demand the respect you've always deserved. It's never too late to discover that your own company, your own truth, your own small space filled with things you've chosen, is better than any luxury that comes with strings attached. The safe is open. The truth is out. The choice, always and forever, is yours.